At exactly 10 a.m, Britain's Supreme Court delivered a unanimous verdict that obliterated the National Security and Governance Act, stripping emergency powers from Keir Starmer's government in what legal historians are already calling the most devastating judgment against a sitting Prime Minister in modern memory. Approval ratings crashed, ministers fled, and within minutes, cries of "Resign, Starmer" echoed through Westminster. But what really happened inside Courtroom 1, and why did this ruling send shockwaves from Downing Street to every corner of Britain? At precisely 10 a.m, the heavy doors to Courtroom 1 closed behind the last arriving journalist. Every bench was filled. Barristers in dark robes, government observers, and a press gallery packed shoulder to shoulder. Mobile devices were banned, so pens scratched across notepads as the air seemed to tighten. Chief Justice Lord Reid rose, his presence commanding instant silence. He began with a single measured sentence. The government has acted unlawfully and exceeded its constitutional authority. The words landed with a clarity that left the room motionless. Reporters later described the moment as electric, a kind of collective holding of breath. Lord Reid continued, reading from a document spanning 40 pages. Each section of the National Security and Governance Act that granted unchecked ministerial power was identified and declared void. He did not pause for effect, but the impact was unmistakable. At 10:04, as he read the phrase, "No one above the law," a gasp cut through the second row of the press gallery. Legal teams exchanged quick, whispered glances, but no one interrupted the Chief Justice's steady delivery. The justices sat in a solid line, 9 robes, 9 faces, not a single note of dissent. Lord Reid made a point of stating, "This is the unanimous judgment of the court." For those present, the unity was as significant as the verdict itself. Whispers moved through the crowd as the implications began to register. The government's most controversial tools, emergency override of councils, surveillance without oversight, were struck down in real time. The judgment's language echoed through the chamber, "No one above the law." As Lord Reid closed the session at 10:18, the silence held for a moment longer before the rush began. Reporters bolted for the exits, phones were switched on, and within minutes, headlines would carry the verdict across the country. But inside the courtroom, the sense of history was unmistakable. The government had been stopped, unanimously, by the highest court in the land. Sections 7 to 15 of the National Security and Governance Act stood at the heart of the judgment. These clauses gave ministers the power to override local councils, suspend parliamentary oversight, and authorise surveillance without a court order. Page after page of the official ruling highlighted the breadth of these provisions. The justices described them as incompatible with the basic structure of the UK's unwritten constitution. Chief Justice Lord Reid wrote, "No government, however well-intentioned, may place itself above the law." The judgment's language was precise. Emergency ministerial powers, void and of no effect. Surveillance without judicial review, banned. Parliamentary suspension, struck down. The court's decision left no room for ambiguity. Legal historians pointed to the clarity and unity of the bench, with all 9 justices signing the opinion. The ruling referenced the 2019 Miller 2 case, which had declared Boris Johnson's prorogation of Parliament unlawful. Yet here, the court's intervention reached further, voiding not just an executive act, but entire sections of primary legislation. Dr. Elaine Morley, a leading legal historian, described the moment as a collective reassertion of the rule of law against executive overreach. The judgment drew a direct line from Miller 2, reaffirming the separation of powers and the principle of parliamentary sovereignty. For legal scholars, the phrase "no one above the law" echoed through both cases, but the current verdict was broader and more decisive. The court's action served as a warning. Statutory language cannot be used to insulate ministers from accountability or to bypass the core safeguards of British democracy. The highlighted pages of the judgment became instant reference points for journalists and politicians alike. In the hours that followed, the focus shifted to the fallout. How Westminster would absorb a ruling that not only voided a government's flagship law, but also redefined the boundaries of executive power in Britain. Newsrooms erupted into action as the Supreme Court judgment hit the wires. BBC and Sky News interrupted regular programming, running red banners with the words, "Supreme Court strikes down Starmer Act, 9-0. Mobile alerts buzzed across the country, and within minutes, The Guardian's homepage led with a single quote, "No one above the law." Outside Parliament, the first wave of protesters gathered before noon. Some carried homemade placards reading "Democracy wins" and "Resign, Starmer." The crowd grew quickly, fueled by calls to action spreading across social media. By early afternoon, chants of rule of law echoed along Whitehall, drawing in students, civil rights activists, and even retired judges. Police maintained a visible but restrained presence as the demonstration remained peaceful but charged. On Twitter and TikTok, the hashtags #JusticePrevails and #Starmer9-0 surged to the top of trending lists. Social media analytics from CrowdTangle clocked over 1.2 million tweets and posts within the first 6 hours. Viral clips showed the moment Lord Reed spoke the verdict, spliced with live scenes of the swelling crowds. Screenshots of the judgment's front page, 40 pages long, stamped with the Supreme Court seal, circulated widely, often paired with the phrase, "No one above the law." Financial markets responded in real time. The FTSE index dropped 1.4% by midday, wiping nearly £3 billion in market value before steadying. Analysts cited political uncertainty and leadership risk as the main drivers. The Bank of England issued a brief statement, aiming to calm investors and reassure the public that core institutions remain stable. Political reporters described a state of siege around Westminster. MPs hurried between interviews and crisis meetings, some visibly shaken. YouGov's Snap poll, released before sunset, showed a 12-point drop in Starmer's approval and 74% public support for the court's decision. By dusk, the story had shifted from legal drama to national crisis, with Parliament at the centre of a storm that showed no sign of passing. Inside Downing Street, the sense of order dissolved within hours. Senior advisors huddled in windowless rooms, their phones silent except for a relentless stream of notifications. By midday, the first whispers of rebellion took shape. Labour MPs began drafting letters of no confidence, the tally climbing past 50 by late afternoon. Staffers described the mood as shell-shocked, with even the most loyal ministers exchanging anxious glances. By 5:45 p.m, news broke that Home Secretary Alice Bennett and Justice Secretary Mark Hayes had resigned. Their statements cited an irreparable loss of confidence in the government's direction and respect for constitutional norms. Minutes later, Business Secretary Priya Khanna followed suit, emphasising the need for accountable leadership. The resignations were delivered in writing to both the Prime Minister and the Parliamentary Whip's office, and confirmed by party officials before the evening news cycle. As the clock neared 8, a nervous crowd pressed against the gates of Downing Street. At 8:07 p.m, Keir Starmer stepped outside, flanked by the few remaining loyalists. Cameras captured every word as he declared, "I accept the judgment of the court. I did what I believed necessary to protect this country." His voice was steady, but the crowd's response was immediate. Chants of "Step down, Starmer" rose over the sound of flashbulbs and live broadcasts. Political historian Sir Jonathan Bell, speaking to BBC Newsnight, called it the most complete collapse of authority in a generation. Laura Kuenssberg described the government as being in open revolt. By midnight, the count of no-confidence letters passed 100. The Labour Party's internal communications system, usually reserved for routine updates, now tracked a rolling list of MPs demanding a leadership contest. In less than 12 hours, the Prime Minister's authority had all but evaporated. The government's majority was gone, its cabinet fractured, and the question of who would lead Britain next was no longer theoretical. The crisis had moved from the courtroom to the heart of political power, leaving only uncertainty in its wake. The Supreme Court's 9-0 ruling against the National Security and Governance Act stands as the most decisive legal defeat for a sitting UK Prime Minister in recent history. In just 40 pages, Chief Justice Lord Reed and the unanimous bench declared key sections of the Act void and of no effect, stating, "No government, however well-intentioned, may place itself above the law." Within 24 hours, Prime Minister Starmer's approval rating dropped by 12 points, over 100 no-confidence letters circulated, and 3 senior ministers resigned. Massive protests erupted, and the FTSE 100 briefly lost £3 billion. Yet, questions remain. How were such sweeping powers passed with limited scrutiny, and what reforms will follow? As political figures manoeuvre and international partners watch closely, the court's words echo across Britain. The verdict reaffirmed that, even in crisis, the boundaries of democracy and law remain non-negotiable. For now, the nation faces a turning point defined not by power, but by accountability.